Have you been curious about making deals with the dead? If you're looking to dip your toes into a Reanimation style deck, the Revenant Recon Precon just may be what you're looking for. Utilizing the power of the Surveil mechanic, you can put cards you don't want to draw, and importantly, your Reanimation targets, straight into your graveyard. Just the act of surveilling alone will grow your flying and vigilant commander, Mirko, Obsessive Theorist's power with a +1/+1 counter. And then, on your end step, based on Mirko's power, you can return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Only catch is that those creatures will have a finality counter, meaning that if the creature dies, it instead gets exiled. I want to talk about how the deck works before getting to upgrades, but to get it out of the way, the phrase finality counter should be like a Pavlovian trigger for you to at least consider spells like Power Conduit and Soul Diviner, if you feel these counters will have a meaningful presence in your deck. These both can remove the finality counter with meaningful upside, be it a +1/+1 counter, which is great on Mirko, or even a drawn card. There's another spell with this kind of effect that I think is just about perfect for what this deck is trying to do. I'll save that one for later, but let me know in the comments if you know what it is. As a hint, it's a creature, released within the standard legal time frame, that is not standard legal. While you take a second to think about what that creature may be, scroll down and subscribe to the channel. It's free for you and you'll get streamlined access to Commander content like this every week. Let's get into surveilling, the primary mechanic that will empower your commander, both literally making him more powerful and allowing him to reanimate threats with higher power. As I counted almost a quarter of the deck, 23 cards have at least a single instance of Surveil in their text box. In your opening hand, you have an 85% chance to have at least one card with Surveil. You still have over a 50% chance to draw 2 or more cards with the mechanic. What you're really after though is those Surveil spells that aren't limited to a single instance. There are 12 such cards in the deck, giving you a 60% chance to draw one in your opening hand. And while you may have to invest more resources into using some of these cards, you'll at least have that option available to you. And one of the best parts about having all these Surveil cards and Surveil payoffs is that it lets you dig through your deck to find even more Surveil cards to keep the value coming. And speaking of Surveil payoffs, I've counted a total of 11 spells of this nature, not including your all-important commander. That totals out to above a 55% chance to have at least one in your opening hand. That said, this is not an element of the deck that I'd want to build upon, but rather refine to the best payoffs. For example, Dimir Spybug will be collecting counters as a flying menace creature each time you surveil. Multiple modes of built-in evasion will make this cheap investment a meaningful threat if left unchecked. Thoughtbound Phantasm, on the other hand, has the same payoff for the same trigger, but as a land-bound creature, it's not applying the same kind of pressure the Spybug will. Out of the box, I can certainly say the Surveil package is well supported. You'll very likely be able to surveil the very same turn you play Mirko, if you have the mana for it. Now, I'm gonna let that comment derail the video for a minute, so we can talk about when to cast Mirko. Because the case with plenty of commanders is that you want them on the battlefield as soon as possible. In fact, each of the other face commanders from MKM more or less fit that exact mold. Mirko is not like other girls though. That's because in order to maximize your value on the same turn you cast him, you need something to reanimate in your graveyard. So if turn 3 rolls around and you can cast your commander but have an empty graveyard, just step back, take a few seconds, and at least consider what other lines you have available. Casting that Dogged Detective may find you something with the Surveil ETB trigger, and leave you less exposed to incidental interaction from something like a Kite Sail Larcenist. Okay, back to the deck mechanics, because Mirko is not the only way to get creatures out of the graveyard. There is a 10-card deep Reanimation package featuring some of the best spells period in this category. I'm talking about Reanimate, Animate Dead, Necromancy, and Rise of the Dark Realms. At the time of recording, the cheapest printings of these cards, not including the ones found in the box, combined for almost $50. That's more than what you can purchase the entire Precon for on a site like TCG Player. So just in case you were wondering if there was any value to be found in these cards, I can confirm that's the case. Since there's a constant source of reanimation in the command zone, having a few less options in the 99 doesn't feel so bad. We gotta talk about the lands now. The Precon comes with a total of 37 lands, a fine amount. 19 that can tap for blue, 18 that can tap for black, and 8 that can only tap for colorless. Already that's a little weird because there's more black than blue in the deck, but we'll use this as a learning experience. Even if you don't want to get into the nitty-gritty, at least take a high-level view of what the mana looks like. Moxfield gives you a great breakdown toward this end. Furthermore, there are 5 lands that always enter tapped. These are all worth keeping around until you get more serious about upgrading, but it's worth noting. Overall, for a Precon, I don't have many complaints about the lands. But for a hassle-free upgrade, I'd probably start by taking out Temple of the False God and Reliquary Tower for a couple basic swamps. And if you've got a Gaia Reach Sanitarium lying around, this is the kind of deck that wants it. Having covered the major themes of the deck, I'll end this section by saying this Precon has what it takes to make for fun and competitive games. Like I said at the start of the video, if you're interested in a Reanimation style deck, this is a great place to start and has some key pieces you'll want if you end up really liking the play patterns and want to expand on it. I've touched on the Reanimation pieces, but there are more reprints in the deck to get excited about. And for the record, the prices you're seeing now and will be seeing are the cheapest you would have found these cards for from previous sets. This is to reflect the community's collective valuation of these spells in the recent past. As far as creatures, $10 Phyrexian Metamorph is the biggest attraction. For 3 mana and a Phyrexian blue, this creature enters the battlefield as any creature or artifact on the battlefield. You probably picked up on this, but it feels like the right time to talk about Mirko only being able to reanimate creatures with power less than his. His baseline stat is a single point of power, which leaves a pretty narrow window until you start surveilling and getting those counters on him. Fortunately, the Metamorph and other shapeshifting creatures meet that threshold, and therefore become some of the highest priority targets you're looking to surveil into your graveyard. Another one of those targets is the $5 Sphinx of the Second Sun. Being a 6/6 flyer is really helpful to start taking down those life totals, but the ability is where it's at. You get to untap, upkeep, and draw at the beginning of your post-combat main phase. Laid all out, this can double your mana, basically give your creatures vigilance, double your upkeep triggers, and of course, give you that beautiful drawn card. Last creature is the $5 Grave Titan. Another 6/6, but this time with Death Touch, creating 2/2/2 zombies on ETB and whenever he attacks. This one makes for an unsavory block for your opponents, but oftentimes necessary because those zombies just keep coming. You can use them to put more pressure on your opponents or leave them back to play defense. You really can't go wrong. The first of the 2 sorceries is $8 Toxic Deluge. This is one of the best board wipes in Commander because it deals with indestructible creatures, so long as you've got the life to pay. $4 Black Sun's Zenith is another way to deal with these pesky indestructible creatures. In this deck, you'll need to be a little bit careful of when you play it, because if you've surveilled, leaving something amazing on top of your library it will get shuffled away as this spell resolves. That resolution is generally a feature, but in this case, you just gotta be aware that this spell doesn't end up in the graveyard like most things. The last reprint before moving on to the new spells printed for this specific deck is $3 Phyrexian Arena. Every upkeep of yours, you trade a point of life for a card. This is a very good rate that only gets better the longer it's on the battlefield. I find this works best in decks that have pretty consistent ways of recouping that life, which this one doesn't. But we've also got 40 life to play with, so if you're looking for a consistent way to draw cards, look no further. Alright folks, on to those new spells, starting with that sneak peek I showed you before, Case of the Shifting Visage. Case is a brand new card type from Murders at Karlov Manor, where you get some value, can solve the case by meeting certain criteria, to then get the solved case benefit. Shifting Visage gives you that constant stream of Surveil triggers that will get your commander to a power where anything in your graveyard can be reanimated. It also triggers on your upkeep, so you can make an even more informed draw at the beginning of your turn. To solve the case, you need to fill up your graveyard with 15 cards. This deck intends to put things in the graveyard, so as long as it isn't exiled, this is a very attainable goal. When you do solve the case, you can start copying every non-legendary creature spell you cast. 26 of the 29 creatures in the deck are non-legendary, so you'll have options and can expect to make use of this ability. And it's worth noting, after you solve the case, you'll still be getting those Surveil triggers every upkeep. By happenstance, we started with the card type I usually end with, so let's keep this ball rolling in reverse order. Ransom Note is a new artifact, but not exclusive to this deck. It's a 1-mana Surveil 1, which isn't the best rate, but synergizes with what the deck is doing and gives a little upside on the back end. Foreboding Steamboat, on the other hand, is exclusive to this deck, and definitely lives up to its name, because from what I can tell, it's totally a steamboat. This vehicle primarily functions as removal, with each player choosing 2 non-token and non-vehicle creatures to exile until the artifact leaves the battlefield. It has an attack trigger that can put those cards into graveyards and investigate, but that Grasp of Fate-ish effect is the feature. It's fairly costly and can impact your own board state, but also exiling a Shriekmaw alongside your opponent's best stuff may make it so they end up not rocking the proverbial boat. Counterpoint is an exciting new instant unconditional counterspell with shades of mana drain, but rather than getting that mana on your next main phase, you can immediately cast a creature, instant, sorcery, or planeswalker from your graveyard for free, so long as its mana value is less than or equal to the spell you countered. Holding up 5 mana can sometimes bite you in the rear, but the upside of this spell is truly game-changing. Charnel Serenade is another reanimation piece. This time a sorcery that surveils 3, brings a creature back with a finality counter, and then loops the same way the refrain spells do. You can hardcast this for 6 to get a creature straight away, or suspend 3 for half the cost. For those unfamiliar with the mechanic, this means you'll exile the card with 3 time counters, removing 1 on each of your upkeeps. When there are no more time counters, the spell is cast for no cost. No matter which mode you choose, the resolution is always the same, putting that spell back into exile with 3 more time counters. It's time for creatures, starting with the best one, not necessarily for this deck, but for the commander space overall. Final Word Phantom. It has flash itself, but gives every other spell you have flash on each of your opponent's end steps. Seeing the actions everyone else takes before committing your own resources is a powerful thing. For instance, letting you save your Chupacabra for an opponent's freshly cast commander. Or, if nothing impactful happened, throw down some ramp and keep it moving. Copycatchers is a Surveil payoff card. letting you spend 1 and a blue to create a token copy of the 2/1 flying creature whenever you surveil. It's a fun idea, but doesn't have the pop-off factor because you first need to create more copies, and then you've got to pay into each one. It's a fine mana sink if you've got nothing else going on, and that's about it. Unshakable Tail is another way to get constant Surveil triggers on your upkeep. This 2 and a black 3/2 also pays off immediately, surveiling 1 on ETB. We're already getting some solid value here, but there's more. You'll be rewarded with a clue token when you put a creature from your library into your graveyard, and then you can use that clue token to return Unshakable Tail from the graveyard to your hand. This creature has everything this deck wants. And so do Eye of Duskmantle and Watcher of Hours, our final 2 new spells. The Eye is a premier target to reanimate early. Firstly, it's a great blocker with 8 toughness, flying, and lifelink. But the Surveil payoff is massive, with this creature letting you play lands and cast spells from your graveyard that you surveilled this turn. Even better is that you can pay life to cast those spells instead of using your mana. Watcher of Hours eventually comes down as a flying Ward 3 6/6 creature, but for 1 and a blue it'll sit suspended in exile for 6 turns, surveilling on every upkeep. This is the exact kind of effect you want in combination with Mirko, and then you get a big creature when all is said and done. You can sign me up for this one. It is upgrade time, and based on what we've talked about with the Surveil and Reanimation mechanics both having good support out of the box, this section will focus on 2 other very important pieces. The first is improving the Reanimation targets, and the second is more quickly filling up your graveyard. Stick with me for one more tangent here. There's a few different ways to get the cards you want into your graveyard, those being tutoring, milling, and discarding. Since this deck leans so heavily into surveilling, there will be times you are intentionally leaving a card on top of your library. Whether it's a nice piece of removal or a land, the point is that you want to draw it. That's why the route I've taken for this upgrade focuses on the third choice of discarding. More specifically, looting effects, where you first draw 1 or more cards to then discard 1 or more cards. That way you can get the spell you wanted from atop your library and can fill your graveyard with reanimation targets. Okay, back to it. I'm keeping these upgrades on a budget, so while the prices may vary card to card, the total cost of these 10 spells will be under $10. And let's start with that creature I teased right at the start of the video, Hexavis. This creature enters the battlefield as a 6/6 flyer thanks to the +1/+1 counters, but technically has 0 power. That means Mirko can be cast with his 1 power and reanimate this construct the very same turn. Even better than a possible turn 3 6/6 flyer is that you can pay mana to activate 2 different abilities. The first one removes a +1/+1 counter from Hexavis to give flying to another target creature. Grave Titan just called me, he likes this. The second one is that Power Conduit-esque type ability, removing a counter from another creature to put a +1/+1 counter on Hexavis. Auton Soldier is yet another creature with 0 power, and therefore can be reanimated at any time with Mirko's ability. This creature can become a copy of any creature on the battlefield, and importantly, is not legendary. It also has Myriad, so when you attack with the creature, you create a token copy, attacking each other player. You really can't go wrong with what you copy here. Even copying something as silly as a Dogged Detective, for instance, will get you 3 more Surveil triggers every attack as those tokens enter the battlefield. If you copy something a little more serious, like a Meteor Golem, you can start wreaking some serious havoc. Sepulchral Primordial is a gift that keeps giving. A 5/4 creature with Intimidate is fair, but when this creature enters the battlefield, you can choose a creature from each opponent's graveyard to join it under your control. The value of this card is clearly dependent on what kind of creatures your opponents are playing with, but at an upgraded precon level, you're sure to find something to your liking. We are now moving to the crossover section, with creatures that are good reanimation targets and can help fill your graveyard. Troll of Khazad-dûm has Super Menace, only able to be blocked by 3 or more creatures. This is usually good to get some damage through or create bad blocks for your opponents. It also has this 1 mana swamp cycling ability, letting you discard the card to find a swamp from your library. This is a major win-win in a deck built like this. You get to hit your land drops, and you put a solid reanimation target in your graveyard. All-Seeing Arbiter is a jack of all trades. It's a fair-sized flyer with an ETB/attack trigger, letting you draw 2 cards and discard 1. More than that, every time you discard a card, you will decrease the power of a target creature equal to the number of different mana values among cards in your graveyard. Not just on your turn, until your next turn. This can clear the way to give you safe attacks, and keep your life total safe. Likeness Looter is a spell from Wilds of Eldraine that has made some waves in Reanimator circles, for good reason. The first ability loots, letting you draw a card and discard a card. The second ability is a copying effect, allowing you to pay X for the looter to become a flying version of a creature in your graveyard with mana value X. Grave Titan called again. He also likes this one. Obsessive Stitcher starts off the exact same way as the looter, letting you tap the creature to draw and then discard a card. The second ability diverges, offering a flat sacrifice fee to return a target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. This creature also has 0 power, making it a really solid early game target for Mirko. The last 3 spells are focused on those looting effects, starting with Careful Study. For a single blue, you can cast this sorcery to draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. Nothing fancy about it, it just gets the job done. Frantic Search is next, as a 2 and a blue instant that again lets you draw 2 and discard 2. The big difference is you get to untap up to 3 lands afterwards, which can leave the door open to cast the final upgrade spell. You find the villain's lair. You've got 2 modes on this instant, each at a fairly inefficient rate, but having the option to dig through your library or interact with your opponents more than makes up for it. It's removal time, folks. 10 cards are getting cut, starting with Thoughtbound Phantasm. This creature is among the weaker Surveil payoffs in the deck, not because the counters aren't good as you Surveil, but because there's not a whole lot you can do about a 1/1 token chump blocking it all game. Copycatchers is another mid-Surveil payoff. It will take a long time and a lot of resources to get those fairies going, and they die blocking everything. While we're on new spells, Final Word Phantom is also going. There's obvious upside with the Flash ability, but this is suited for decks that are frankly a little higher powered, where you can combo off a win, or develop a game-winning board state while your opponents are tapped out. Marvo, Deep Operative, our octopus friend, demands too much to be kept in the deck. Balancing between reanimation and top deck matters is not where I want to be. That said, this looks like a super unique and fun commander to try building around. Master of Death fills the same role as Dogged Detective for 1 additional mana, letting you surveil on ETB and return it to your hand from the graveyard. Because they both function as repeatable surveil triggers and as a throwaway blocker, I'd rather pay 2 mana to cast the Detective than 3 for the Master. Amphin Mutineer is one of a few creatures that offer removal in the deck, and in my estimation, the weakest among them. Not by a lot though, so if you prefer the Pirate compared to the Horror or the Elemental, by all means, keep them around. Sphinx of the Second Sun is the last creature getting cut. This is a welcome reprint, but isn't optimal in a deck like this, where there aren't all that many upkeep triggers or super impactful ways to utilize that bonus mana. Ransom Note is filler level in this deck. Each side of the spell are pretty inefficient rates for the game action, and there aren't enough things that care about clues or permanence to keep this around. Curate is one of the weaker one-off surveil spells. There is plenty of support for Surveil already in the deck, so you're not going to miss out on this one or our last spell to be cut. Discovery Dispersal. It's the same as Curate on the Discovery side, only a sorcery, which will be the most frequent casting mode. Dispersal is nice disruption, but it can be a bit dicey, as it has to hit every opponent. If they've got something with a scary ETB or casting trigger, you'll be stuck with the mopey Discovery side. That completes the upgrade portion of the video. I do want to mention that if you've enjoyed this set and have been cracking packs, or played at the pre-release and found Drag the Canal, Candlestick, or Undercity Sewers, these are all great upgrade options as well. And that will do it for me. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video if you liked the video, and let me know in the comments your best budget ads for this Revenant Recon Precon.